Solutions to the Dropout Crisis, addressing the dropout crisis one strategy at a time. Brought to you by the National Dropout Prevention Center Network with support from K-12 and Fuel Education and in partnership with Clemson Broadcast Productions. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome once again to Solutions to the Dropout Crisis. This month's program could not be more important, and so how wonderful to have Dr. Sandy Addis, the director of the National Dropout Prevention Center, with me to explore the very important topic of student engagement.
Thank you, Marty. It is a very important topic. Just yesterday I was in North Carolina and a principal specifically asked me, what kind of help can you give me to increase student engagement in my school?
Oh my, perfect timing. I bet you had an answer for him.
I did.
And we think we have an answer for all of you because we do hear that buzzword of student engagement and we really need to identify, what it is and what can we do about improving it over time. And so a very interesting report has recently been published by the National Dropout Prevention Center. And Sandy, there were some very special people involved in this report. Could you tell us about that, please?
Sure I can, Marty. At the National Dropout Prevention Center, we have a dozen what we call research fellows. These are researchers, very experienced, capable people all over the nation who assist us with developing position papers and documents, doing research and translating that research into practice for our users, for educators and practitioners all over the country. The research fellows have been in existence for 5 years now, and they are a fantastic asset to the National Dropout Prevention Center. We could not do our work without the research fellows. I'm pleased to have with me today, and with us today and here virtually, our two presenters who represent the research fellows. Terry Derry is an educational consultant and a partner with Cascade Educational Consultants. Terry has over 30 years of experience in education. She focuses particularly on issues of teacher quality, positive behavioral interventions, inclusion, service learning in the academic setting. She has taught both general and special education. She has worked for the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, and recently I had the privilege of working with Terry in a project, a rural dropout prevention project that was offered by the U.S. Department of Education, and so we were able to work with Terry Derry there. Also, Terry Pickerel, one of our presenters today. Terry is the chair of the National Dropout Prevention Center Research Fellows organization, and he leads that group very effectively. Terry Pickerel is president of Cascade Educational Consultants. He has provided technical assistance and training both in the United States and in foreign countries to teachers, to district level policymakers and education leaders on effective strategies with a particular focus on engaging youth. So we're very fortunate to have the two of them, and we're fortunate to call attention to our most recent publication from the National Dropout Prevention Center and Network, done by these two authors, Terry Derry and Terry Pickerel, and also with assistance and with co-authored by Rob Schumer and Anderson Williams. So Marty, we're very fortunate to have both these presenters and their expertise and to have this topic today in such a timely manner.
Yes, indeed. And we do welcome you to the program today. I want to point out to our viewers that this is just the beginning of the exploration of this topic. The report, we hope you will read it after the program today. And also on our website are many resources that you can take your faculty and staff to the next steps to learning more about student engagement and what you can specifically start doing in your schools and school districts. So this is an exciting day because it's such an important topic. So shall we turn the torch over now to Terry Pickerel, who is our NDPC fellow in charge here, and get us started, Terry.
Great. Well, thank you both. And Sandy, thank you for your leadership and your commitment to making sure that evidence and research leads to effective practices. One of the unique things about the National Dropout Prevention Center is they created 15 effective strategies for dropout prevention. And I think for many of you, you're familiar with them. But what's unique about it for us and for student engagement is it's across all grades, and so there's work in family engagement, early childhood. It's across all stakeholders, so family, community are expected to be part of dropout prevention strategies. That the pedagogies and the strategies are active and they're collaborative, and that there's a focus on the learning environment. And so we think that student engagement, and as Sandy has shown you our recent policy paper, fits right into the middle of these 15 strategies and is woven well in them. We're not the only ones that think about student engagement as a part of dropout prevention. And so you'll see here that the ASCD's Whole Child Initiative has developed the engagement gap. But what they've looked at is the difference between students who are disengaged and students who are engaged, and find that if the teaching environment is relevant, if the lessons are meaningful, and if students are engaged, that they do better in school, academically, socially, civically, and it prepares them better for life outside of school, particularly in careers. And so here's one international organization that in their title say we want to make each school and every classroom an all-engaging learning environment. The Silent Epidemic on the right there, the Perspectives of High School Dropouts, did a survey of people who had dropped out of high school and asked them why it was that they weren't in school, what drove them from school. And what they found was that the students reported they were bored, they were unmotivated, and they were disengaged. And so as a result, the Silent Epidemic, along with ASCD and the engagement gap, are both advocating for more student engagement. What's interesting and leads us to how we see student engagement is they talk both about content, which is what are the strategies within schools and communities that we can integrate and sustain, but they also talk about context, which is what is the surround, what is the environment, what is the climate in which these strategies need to be sustained. And many times in education, we look at a strategy without thinking about the context. And both of these reports, as well as our report, focus both on content, the strategies, and on context, which is the quality and character of the school that needs to support the sustainability of these student engagement and corresponding strategies. We also found, as we looked at the research and the evidence, is that there's varying definitions of student engagement. And what I want to do is turn it to Terry Derry and let her talk about how we define student engagement. Terry?
Okay, so in order to get at student engagement, we need to understand what it is we're all talking about. So I've done a lot of talking with teachers and asking them to describe, what do you mean by student engagement? How do you know it when you see it? And often what I hear is it means students are paying attention, they're listening, they have eye contact, they're following along. Well, what we now understand about student engagement is that it's much more complex than that. What we look at in reality is in order for students to be engaged, we know that they need to have a willingness to put forth effort. They need to have they need to be invested in them, with themselves, with their effort, with their persistence to a task. They need to understand that there's a commitment to the relationships, to what they're doing in class, and that they're willing to put forth the necessary effort in order to be successful. So it's a lot more complex than just looking at students that are not being disruptive, that are following along, that are engaged in the rules. But we really want to see a higher level of personal commitment and willingness to put that effort forth. So what it really comes down to, if we go back to the slide for a second, what it comes down to is relationships. And that seems to be the core to student engagement, both individual relationships between students to teachers, teachers to teachers, students to students, but all of those individuals, principals, parents, the community, all of the individuals that students come in contact with, they need to be developing strong, caring, supportive relationships with those individuals. We also know that it's about relationships with course content. And that seems a little odd, but if you think about the content being what helps students relate to what they're learning, and it becomes something that's real and meaningful and worthy of their attention and their commitment. So content is really an important characteristic, making sure that that content is relevant and personally meaningful to each student, that it's culturally relevant. that it's equitable to engage every student in the classroom. The other component of relationships that's on a broader scale is school climate, to look at the quality and character of life for students in the school, what they are seeing, what they are understanding, and what they are experiencing. Finally, I just want to make a little comment about, there's a recent research study that came out from the Smithsonian, and what they found is that they put headsets on students and teachers, and they found that when they could actually measure the brain activity, and when students were engaged with each other and with the teacher, their engagement, their participation, their understanding rose. And so that's a really important new study that we can actually look at what's happening within the brain. So the next thing we need to look at is how we do student engagement with intentionality. So if you would put that slide up about, student engagement, we know is critical for dropout prevention. We know that it helps build stronger attributes in students, that their personal goals, what they're willing, what they want to know and be able to do, the energy and commitment, the personal growth that they are committed to, the willingness to persist in tasks, self-reliance, being able to be dependent on oneself and not always dependent on the presence of an adult or the external outcome. So looking at student engagement being something that helps to make all of these things happen. It builds those attributes. It creates the positive relationships. It improves the climate of the school. It strengthens community collaborations. Those are all the things that we know that will help with student engagement, will also help with reducing dropouts. But we need to remember that doesn't just happen. It has to happen with intentionality. It has to happen with a commitment to changing the way that we do school. So I'm going to turn it back to you guys.
Here we are. We have a time to kind of converse on this, and I think this whole idea of intentionality is pretty key. Mm-hmm. It doesn't just happen that if you're friendly to your students, mm-hmm. that everything else will follow.
That's true.
I mean, there's just so many layers, and I found that really interesting. It wasn't just people relationships, but mm-hmm. relationship with the course content.
And Marty, I was thinking about this topic. Have you ever had a job that you weren't engaged in?
Yes,
and have
indeed.
you ever? I remember some menial jobs I had, and then I can remember many jobs I've had that I was very engaged in. And think about the different performance that we had. Think about being all in. Think about thinking about it even when you're not on the job, mm-hmm. and think about being focused on the task when you're there because you're engaged in the work.
That's right.
And then I think about the time I worked as a clerk in a convenience store, and I was not very engaged, and so I spent my time twiddling my thumbs and twiddling my brain about other things. Probably not the best performance.
No, indeed. I mean, I often think about computers. I have 3 children, and my boys were always fascinated with computers, but my daughter, probably because the boys didn't want to do it, had nothing to do with computers until she went into a program on graphic design because she loves art and so forth, and she had to use the computer. Well, she was engaged because mm-hmm. she was interested in the whole thing. It talks about it. So the course content about learning how to use a computer, mm-hmm. and I think many of us can say that, hands off until we had to do it, and then we got engaged in it, and for hours can go by, and we can be fascinated
sure.
by what we can do with the computer. So it's as adults we can see that, mm-hmm. and to see that the same rules apply for our young people mm-hmm. in the classroom. So
certainly.
But the relationships, always relationships. Mm-hmm. Any other comments about that? Because the relationships thing is a huge item, both within the school, but within the community as well. And I know Terry Pickerel, being the sociologist that you are, you see that point being really important.
Yeah, and I think to Sandy's point about being a clerk in a store, that it wasn't the fact that he wasn't, it was the fact he wasn't engaged, but there were ways that he could have been engaged, mm-hmm. some that he could have taken on and some that the store could have taken on, to look at opportunities to say, Sandy, what's meaningful to you beyond what your job title is? And mm-hmm. I think one of the things that we don't do well is ask young people what's meaningful to them. Mm-hmm. Terry's comment and your comment, Marty, about intentionality, that I think we ask students questions, but we don't ask them some of the important question, which is, what is meaningful to you? We ask them what they want to do in future life, but why don't we ask them what they want to do in the next 5 minutes? So Sandy, when you were a clerk, to ask you, what do you want to do in the next 5 minutes, as opposed to, getting your job done, it's like, what else could you do? And I would imagine, Sandy, you had certain customers that you interacted with that made you feel better than other customers. And I think the same in school. And one of the things that we're advocating for, and as we start talking about the report, is we're weaving this into the school so that it's each student every day in every class, instead of just every once in a while. So Sandy, with some customers that smiled at you and you smiled back, we want to have every customer smiling at you and you smiling back. We want you, as you talked about, all in. It's like at athletic events, some people are on the edge of their seat the entire time, others are more laid back. And so we think engagement is at the edge of your seat. And we're going to talk later about what those seats could actually look like in a school that aren't kind of the traditional ways of thinking about that.
Well, I do love your metaphor about weaving student engagement. I don't know who the brilliant mind was who kind of saw that. But you just alluded to it just now, Terry, with it's not just about this one-on-one, but it's just woven throughout Terry, both Terrys here. And so I think that particular metaphor, I guess is the word, is really something we can all picture and see what those different threads are.
Yeah. And now you've got me thinking about my 40 years ago store clerk job, and I think, all right, what could have made me engaged? Well, people, relationships with people, options, investment. A commission would have been nice. That would have engaged me. Certainly, being able to make a few decisions about my environment and about how things occurred. All those things would have made me more engaged.
Absolutely. So there are ways, and I just think about a local grocery store chain that really trains its young people well, who they have in there doing these entry-level jobs, and they obviously have been well trained because every one of them is engaging and friendly and happy because they're enjoying what could have been a mundane task of loading groceries and taking it out to the car. They're really enjoying the whole thing and engaging with you. So it's something that we can role model and help our young people learn to do in what seems like the most mundane of tasks. All of a sudden, have it become something pretty important and interesting.
Sure.
Yeah. So shall we move on to the what I referred to before, this weaving student engagement? I think, Terry Pickrell, you were going to kind of tell us about that.
Right. I think, your weaving metaphor, and I'm sure it was Terry Derry that came up with the metaphor. So let's give her credit, and also as being the senior author, that this is about moving student engagement from the margin to the mainstream. And it's not just about some teachers, sometimes some students, but it's really about, as I said earlier, it's about being intentional, being inclusive. And so what we looked at in the paper was saying, why would a school not engage in student engagement? Why would it not make it a core part of its practices? So we came up with 8 different questions, from what is student engagement to how can schools implement it? What are sustainability methods? What does the research show? And so the weaving student engagement into the core practices of school, maybe you could put that slide up, Marty, so that people can see the report. I know that Sandy highlighted it just a little while ago, that we answered those questions. We answered the question of what is it, how can schools implement it, what does the research show, what are the most effective practices, how do you bring other people to bear? And we really appreciate Sandy and Marty, NDPC's leadership in taking this on when they have choices of all kinds of opportunities to advocate for the 15 strategies and the processes to do that. We appreciate the fact that you've said student engagement is something that's not just woven into schools, but also woven into those 15 practices, that it's hard to think about early childhood or school community collaboration or parent engagement without thinking about engagement. And Marty, if you could put the next slide up on the youth continuum. this is really an important notion and framework for us. And Anderson Williams, one of our authors, our co-authors, developed this with young people, which is moved. So oftentimes earlier on, we talked about ASCD's Whole Child Initiative talked about the engagement gap, and they talked about passive and active, engaged, disengaged. And this is really about a bridge of relationships that moves from participation to voice to leadership to engagement. So it's not just active on one side and passive on the other, bored on one side, not bored on the other, unmotivated, motivated. This is really about a pathway that provides an opportunity for adults and young people to be actively engaged. And so if you think back to a time in your life when you participated, maybe it was on a sports team, but you had more to give. Sandy, your notion of being a clerk in the store, that you were there to participate. Then, so in participation, the supervisor, or in schools, the teacher, has all the power, and the relationship is one of, I'm providing an opportunity, I'm inviting you to join us. And that happens in schools, and in some places that's what the necessary strategy is. But we also want to move from being a participant to having a voice, so that once you're at the table, once you're in a relationship, is to honor your voice. So Sandy, in your case of saying, Sandy, do you have some things that you'd like to do better than others? Do you have some ideas about how we could stack things in the store better? What ideas do you have about ways we could improve our customer service? So it's moving from having somebody to be an active participant to actually having a voice at the table. And then we move from participating in voice to leadership, which is formal opportunities for young people to show leadership. And we're not just talking about student council leaders or being part of committees. What we're talking about is what happens every day in schools, or when you're in small groups, of how do you have leadership in small groups? How do you have opportunities to gain leadership skills and knowledge and dispositions on a daily basis, not just on a monthly or bi-monthly basis. And as you think about this participation to voice to leadership, think about the relationship between a teacher and a student, that initially it starts with the student having the power and having the obligation, to students having reactions and responses, to students having more voice, to having more leadership. And then when we get to the end goal, which is engagement, there's a more equitable relationship between young people and adults, between students and teachers. So that initially you may have teachers saying, I'm going to give you some options today. Here's the menu. And that happens in schools all the time. It's a menu an adult has created based on the curriculum or their interest or opportunities. But when we get to engagement, the question isn't about what teachers want, it's what do we want? And so you begin to move to a more equitable power structure where young people and adults have the opportunity to come up with those options, so that it becomes co-owned, and it becomes, to one of the things that we've worked with Rob and with Terry and Anderson, is this whole issue around intergenerational shared leadership. And there's a lot of things we hear in schools about shared leadership, but it's usually talking about adults. And what we're saying is, let's talk about shared leadership in terms of students and students with adults. So we believe, and what we did was use this continuum of moving from participation to voice to leadership to engagement as a way of showing people the responsibility of young people and the responsibility of adults simultaneously. And it's the way to get across this divide, as opposed to a big jump. It's a pathway that one can take to achieve that. So our commitment is to weave student engagement into the core of schools, and to use this continuum to do it. And if you could put up the next slide with the graphic in it, Marty, I'll quickly run through this as another way of thinking about the continuum and about the weaving process. That if we have student engagement at the center, then remember earlier, Terry talked about the individual intentionality, the individual relationship. So we have individual behavior, attitudes, and resiliency, a sense of belonging, connectedness, competency, potency. And then we also have group inclusiveness and group leadership and pedagogies like service learning. So when we think about student engagement, it's not just about the student, but it's also about the student in a variety of groups in which they operate and in which they function. Then we also have the school. We talk many times about the school climate, the quality and the character of the school, and the obligation of the school to teach young people how to be good people, have good character, but also to develop academic skills, social emotional skills, civic skills, career skills, etc. So the school has an obligation not just to teach young people, but to engage them and to make meaning out of things that they're interested in, that things are relevant to them, and things that have importance to them now and in the future. And also, as you can see in the lower right-hand side, we also talk about the community in terms of parents and family and community engagement. So if you think about the earlier continuum about participation, voice, leadership, and engagement, let's also think about how do we engage parents. Do we just invite them in to participate in something? Do we ask them to have a voice in something? Do we provide them an opportunity to be leaders? Or do we really truly engage them, which is we listen to ideas they have, that we co-create things? And then what we're never asking people to do is buy in to assisting young people. We're asking them to own something. And I think it's one of the differences in the way that we look at student engagement is that we want to co-create strategies and opportunities and invitations so that everybody is fully engaged and on the edge of their seat, so that they always want to be engaged and it has a result now and in the future. So in essence, this is a nesting process. We talked about the weaving. Now I'm going to throw another metaphor in there around a nesting. And so if all the stakeholders are engaged and focused on student engagement, then there's a greater support system and a greater opportunity to be sustained.
I think it boils down to, and I think we need to pause for breath here, because it's a lot for everyone to absorb at once here. It's like it takes a village. That really brings it in great depth to what that old saying is, takes a village to raise a child. But the continuum, I just want to just remember that for a minute, and I'll just show that slide again, if we could just put it up, just to refresh our memories about the continuum. If we could just look at that a second. That's interesting to me, because I come a lot from the service learning world, and the big topic is youth voice, and that's so important. This very clearly shows that you can be at one end and you can eventually get to the other, but it is a process. And just think about where our viewers are who are embarking on this, that they need to feel comfortable with that. So this whole idea of a process, Sandy, what do you think?
Well, I'm thinking that along that adult continuum, if I'm trying to lead a group of educators to increase engagement, they can't just start coaching instantly. They have to offer voice and offer leadership opportunities to move the youth continuum along with them.
Right. So that was one point that I felt important to bring out. So we will get to this in just a minute, but can we just see Terry a minute to have some final comments here about this first section, which is kind of defining what it is and the overwhelmingness of it, and it's kind of getting these metaphors really help us see something, the weaving and the nesting, that works too, Terry, to kind of see what we're trying to get our hands on today, and why today's program is such a catalyst for further learning and exploration of this topic.
Sure is.
Yeah, Sandy, you were talking about how to get people to move along the continuum, and for some people, voice is the end, and for us, it's the beginning. To give somebody a voice shouldn't be the goal. It should be part of a process to move them through. I also think, Sandy, your point was getting at just jumping right in the deep end and starting to engage, as opposed to walking through this process or moving through it. That this is risky. I mean, that in schools, a lot of people are risk adverse. And this really takes a risk of being able to trust one's heart, trust one's soul, so trust one's experiences, of saying, you know what, I'm going to ask students to come up with the options. What if they don't? Have I got a backup plan? And to me, this is one of those things where you trust the process and say, if you're asking good questions and you're authentically engaging the students and you trust the process, you're going to get the answers. It may take a while. And I think one of the things we don't do well in school is have patience for thought and reflection. And so when we ask students questions, we rarely think they're going to automatically come up with an answer in the next 5 seconds. We give them 3, 4, 5 minutes to ponder and then come back with some answers. And that's a little bit atypical of wanting to, in a 47-minute classroom, we've got to do this in the next 2 minutes, but to give young people the opportunity to ponder. So if we ask good questions, if we're willing to take the risk, and that we're willing to be learners as well as teachers as adults in schools, then to me the whole paradigm shifts from student engagement to everybody being engaged.
Yeah. So, well, we need to move on to how can we get started with this now? We kind of have a handle on what student engagement is and its importance, and well, not just dropout prevention, but for all our students, I think. Good dropout prevention is good for all our students, and this one in particularly. I think, Terry Derry, you're going to kind of take us through the research here, which is nails it, I think.
I think what it does is give us a compelling reason to actually engage in this journey. When we look at the research, we find that there are actually 4 elements that are critical to student engagement that really need to be in place in order for schools to be successful, in order to provide this level of engagement for students. So the 4 elements that we discovered in our report were to look at having a systemic focus. So we need to do this systemically, and Terry alluded to that. It's not just one teacher doing this, it's not just one classroom or set of classrooms. It's how do we look at changing the way we do school? How do we change our practices? And the research gives us some really compelling understanding of how to do that and how to do it well. The other element is to have a supportive environment, to make sure that we are, again, nurturing those relationships, but that there's a support system. The third element is having sound pedagogy. So making sure that the pedagogies we use in the classroom are those that are going to help instruction be meaningful and that will be engaging for students. We can very quickly see classrooms that are sit and get, or the students aren't as actively engaged. And the research, again, supports how we need to move our pedagogy toward more active strategies. And the fourth element, is meaningful learning, to really look at how we connect to students in ways that are meaningful, that allow students contribution. And I think that goes back, Marty, to your comment about service learning. It's really important for students to have ways that they contribute, that they feel that their presence matters, and that there's an authentic choice. It's not made up. It's not something that we do just because, but that we are actually listening and willing to act on the choices that students are given. So if we look at the research, if you put up the slide on systemic focus, there are a number of studies across a lot of years. And this was astounding to me when I did a literature review on student engagement and the research that supports it. Going back to 1993, we have some really strong research that says if we're going to do this well, we need to have a systemic focus. We need to have expectations, a set of beliefs, practices, support, and accountability that all lead to and enhance student engagement. We know that having an effective school climate helps to address risk factors. We know that risk factors are strongly correlated with students dropping out of school. The risk factors are addressed very effectively through school climate, including connectedness, engagement, empowerment, and self-efficacy. We know that effective student climate helps those connections build in school. We know that they help students feel a sense of belonging, that they feel welcomed and included in that environment, and that it promotes students taking ownership and being engaged in their school. Student engagement also needs to be integrally tied to how the school functions. Across policies, across practices, what the school does, what the school expects of staff, what the school expects of students, and how those things interplay on each other. So the research is clear. Graduation rates are likely to increase if we take on this work across policies, across practices, and increase our school climate through that. So then we're going to look at supportive environment. Again, there's a lot of good research dating quite a number of years back that tells us that we need to have a supportive environment for school students, that they feel a sense of interdependency, that they feel that they are in a safe and caring environment, that students and teachers both support each other. But one of the really important things that has come out of this research is an understanding of students' belief about themselves, their belief in their ability to be competent and successful in school. And that, in large part, comes from students' understanding of how others feel about them. So when teachers hold low expectations for students, that impairs their ability to believe that they have competence, and that belief in competence leads to higher levels of engagement and clearly higher levels of academic success. So that, again, that interplay between students, teachers, and students themselves is really important in how they understand what they can do and the way that they approach tasks. That all leads to higher levels of academic competency and, importantly, resilience. And resilience has a strong correlation with dropout rates. So all of that leads us to understand that we need to have strong school community relationships, strong collaborations between the school and others around, so that there is that net of support for students across the spectrum of their experience. And that comes out of foundational strategies in the 15 strategies that the National Dropout Prevention Center promotes. Those come out clearly, and they're supported by research. So all of that is tying together, and I think it's really important for people to understand that they're not accidental things that we've pulled out of the air, but there is research that supports the strategies that are promoted by the center and that we're asking schools to take on. So the third element that we have some really strong research on is on pedagogy, the expectations we hold for students, the kinds of pedagogy that we use in the classroom. Marty, you mentioned service learning as being one of those, and that is clear. That's one of the basic core strategies that the center promotes. So looking at the active pedagogies that we've been talking about, but how we do that in ways that are relevant and meaningful to students. So it doesn't lead to as high a level of engagement if we use active pedagogies that students are disconnected by. So how do we create those opportunities for students that allow them to contribute, that are career related? It's career related is something that we've seen is really important to students, that helps to increase their engagement. Career and technical education are leaders in that realm. But teachers across the curriculum are finding ways to integrate those career skills and that helps to make their learning more meaningful and relevant. The accountability that we hold for students is critical. How we hold students accountable to high standards, and that goes back to our belief in what they are able to do. But to hold them accountable, to expect them to stay at those high levels, and to make sure that those expectations are challenging but achievable. So we want to make sure that we don't set out expectations that are unrealistic, but that students are able to achieve success with some level of challenge. And that it comes back to a notion of comfort, risk, and danger that Terry and I often talk about, that it's moving students out of their comfort zone, but making sure that you don't get too far into the danger zone. We want them to have risk and challenge and be vulnerable to change and learning, but that they feel supported within that and that they feel confident in being able to achieve that success. And the pedagogies we choose are the ones that will help them get there. So we make sure that we are giving them opportunities to prove that success and to feel that confidence. So the last set of research that we need to look at is meaningful learning, but meaningful learning that is connected with authentic choice. And this, again, is supported by the pedagogies, but it's also part of making sure that we are being culturally relevant, that students understand that what they are doing actually leads to things that they want to know and be able to do. So personal goals, being able to have, again, that authentic choice, We know that Shelley Billig had a really important study of the literature, and her conclusion was that teaching and learning can't be successful without active engagement, and that's the kind of engagement we're talking about. Having students being participants in the classroom, but most importantly, student-centered classrooms, so that we are first asking ourselves, what do students need to know and be able to do? What are the things that we need to do then as adults to get them there? How does that relate to students' lives, rather than the decision being, oh, this teacher has a break in their schedule, so we're going to put them there, but looking at what is it that students need, and then how do we structure the adult world in order to meet those needs? And I think Terry makes a good point about asking students what their needs are, so that we are putting them first, but we are putting them first with that autonomy, with that sense of what their choice, what they know about how they learn best and how they can be most successful. That's instrumental to engagement. So we need to make sure that we're not setting students up with, I call it the vote until you get it right, but that it's real choice, that it's not a choice between, if you do this, you can either do this now or you'll get a 0 on your paper. That's not real authentic choice. So how do we give students choice in how they do assignments, or how they prove mastery, or how they achieve mastery, and how we can give them options within that realm and help them learn how to learn? That's how we create independent learners that are truly engaged. And when we do that, the research clearly shows us that dropouts are reduced, discipline issues, which is a whole other issue that ties really tightly in with dropout, but discipline issues reduce. So behavior expectations go up, and students' response to that increases. Student absences decrease. Those are all important factors, both in dropout and, as Marty, you said earlier, really critical for all students to be successful, and that's really what this is all about.
Well, there's such a strong research base here. And of course, we're overwhelmed by the research, but we're really concerned, as are you, with taking research to practice.
Certainly.
And that's where the solutions are, and that's what we're all about. So help us now explain to our viewers and share some information, Terry, about the research going to practice in the time we have left here. So I'm ready to turn it back to you. Are you ready? Do you have any other questions, Sandy,
No, except
before we go
I'm just
forward?
sitting here thinking, engaged students learn and stay.
Yes, yes, exactly. So now let's see how we can take this research and how you are observing and noticing and seeing and all over the country how people are taking research and putting it to practice and having good success with their students.
Well, we've both been fortunate to be able to visit schools and districts and to learn exactly what you're talking about. So one of the things Terry and I have done is to think about these 4 areas of research and then put a couple of examples behind each of them. So the first one was about systemic focus.
Okay.
And Bill Hughes, the used to be the superintendent in Greendale Schools in Wisconsin, actually had student engagement as part of the hiring process. And he would ask questions about what attributes teachers have about engaging students, what experience do they have, what aspirations do they have, what strategies do they use. So when you think about policy and think about a system focus, there's no better policy than the hiring policy, and which sets the priorities for the district. So what he did was set the priorities for the district of saying having a teacher and instructional leaders and principals and assistant principals that are committed to student engagement is a critical attribute that he's looking for, and the school's looking for, and school board is looking for in their teachers. I'm going to go to Terry in a minute to talk about a high school example, but I also wanted to just read something I just recently received from Meridian, Connecticut, where they've now gone to a student engagement approach, and they said that while the shift hasn't been easy, it's helped increase student engagement and decrease time off task as students take more ownership of their work. And here's a quote: for 17 or 18 years, it was, what am I going to tell the kids today? And now it's, what am I going to have the kids show me today? The teacher said, the person who is blown away by this is me. So I think, again, as we start to shift from who's learning and who's teaching, what's relevant, what's irrelevant, that looking at a systemic focus, district-wide and school-wide, is an essential part. And Terry, I know you've got an example from Lake Mills High School there in Wisconsin.
Sure. If you want to throw up the slide on systemic focus, it gives a few examples of practices that are really helpful in responding to that research. So it provides a translation of if that research is what we believe in and are willing to take to task. These are the examples of practices schools might look to use. So one of the schools that I've worked with is a school in Lake Mills, Wisconsin, the high school, and what I'm seeing in that school is an interesting process of teachers and relating to the kinds of things that they can do to change their pedagogy, to change their classrooms into what we consider mastery learning classrooms. So they're really looking at student-centered approaches, and it has become now department process. So the entire foreign language department, the entire math department, the entire science department, that's where we're starting to look at that systemic focus. And it's led by a principal who not only gives permission and allows them to be innovative in their practices, but is actively supportive of it. So actively promotes it, actively works with teachers to increase their knowledge base and change their practice, providing time for curriculum work. Curriculum development is really key to all of this. But how they're really looking systemically at how they change the way that they do this, but not just teacher by teacher, to really become more systemic in their practice. And that collaboration is really critical between staff so that they are working on it together, that they are in a professional learning environment. And I guess that's really the true meaning of a professional learning community, that they're not just sitting around and talking about things they need to do. They're intentionally working toward changing their practice in a systemic way.
Well, the systemic is such a foundation for what's to come. Sandy, as the former school administrator, you know this well.
That's true, Marty. If the system isn't on board, if everyone doesn't understand and own and practice an initiative like this, it's not going to work well.
Yeah, it's not well. So we have to start with that. Okay, moving forward.
Okay, so the next element that we talked about in the research was having a supportive environment. So to look at how we change our practices to create those kinds of environments. And an example that I have of this that I've seen it's the Waupun Junior and Senior High School, again in Wisconsin. What they are doing in their math curriculum is they've looked at how they can become more student-centered. They can provide students choice in how they achieve mastery within a very caring, supportive climate. So they've created a climate within the classroom that helps students understand that there are lots of different ways to learn math. We know that there are lots of different ways to get to the correct answer using correct strategies, but also having some divergency. So having students that are working at an individual skill level, but all working together as an integrated community that supports each other. So there's a collaboration between students. Students see somebody having a need and they help meet that need. Adults observe a student having a rough day and they take them for a walk out in the hall to talk about what's going on and help them be able to get back into the class. Those are the kinds of things that demonstrate that supportive environment that's really necessary for students to achieve. And I know, Terry, you had a couple of examples as well in Montana and Arizona, if you'd like to share those.
Right, and earlier we talked about this being a P12 initiative, that it's in preschool, elementary, middle, and high. And if we're talking about dropout prevention, we're talking about early intervention as well. So I had the privilege 2 weeks ago of being at Swan River School in Big Fork, Montana, and visited a class for 2 days. That its focus is on engagement as an expectation, as a norm, and as a classroom climate. So as you walk into the classroom, there's no desk. There are balls you can sit on, there's tables you can sit at, or there's the floor you can sit on. And so students every day have a choice of where to sit and how to sit. Also, what's interesting is that they've created professional learning communities among these fifth graders. And I've blogged about this, and there's a video at the end that we'll give you the URL to, that you can actually see what goes on in this classroom. But what's interesting is the students, when they're doing work, they take a large poster paper and they put some ideas at the top of it. and then they share their work with one or more of their fellow students, and they put little sticky notes about things that they might be able to improve. They said, did you think about this? I noticed that you're a good fisherman, but you didn't include that in your paper or in your topic. So it's professional learning communities among young people, so that the environment is one that's conducive and an expectation. So if the teacher didn't provide that opportunity for feedback and reflection, the students would revolt. They'd say, wait, this is what we do. We don't, when we start our first draft, we start with some ideas and then we run it by our fellow students to get feedback. So she's embedded this culture of reflection into the entire classroom. At Kellis High School in Arizona, they've created systems that are inclusive. So they have students with and without intellectual disabilities working together, having classrooms together, playing sports together. And one of the first things they did was saying, if we're going to have a climate that's inclusive, we have to give people more availability of students different from them. So instead of having a concentrated area where the special education students are, is every wing of the school has special education classrooms, so that the classrooms and the students and the teachers can mingle and co-create classes and hold classes together, so that there's an environment of inclusiveness that's reflected in the physical layout of the building. Which is really important, Sandy, as you know, that it's not just about having something as a priority, but what are the events, what are the procedures, and what are the opportunities for people to have access. And so at Kellis, they've focused on a school climate that's inclusive, but they made sure that people have access every day, every classroom, for students that are different to interact and to be together. So Terry, I'll turn it back to you for the next one.
All right. So sound pedagogy is the next set of practices that, again, correlates to the research. And I think one of the important things to remember about this is it's not just doing the correct pedagogy, but it's also having high expectations for each student. And I think that relates very well to what Terry was talking about with Kellis, that these students are expected to be part of the community together, and that they work toward that, and then the pedagogy supports that and encourages that, and takes it to the practice within the classroom. So if we look at the slide it'll show you a few practices that relate to that. I want to give you an example of going back to the Lake Mills High School in Wisconsin, where we have again, it's a systemic look at how they can do this. But then when we drill that down to the classroom level, what are the things that are happening? When we talk about mastery learning, what does that mean? And it means that we are having students take on tasks that are challenging, but they're achievable. It means that we are using student-centered rather than teacher-driven instruction. So students take responsibility, students take ownership of their learning. For example, in a chemistry classroom in the school, students they're working at almost a self-paced kind of level, but yet it's a classroom-based and they follow the curriculum, so it's not completely open and it's self-paced, but it's focused on mastery. Students move on to a quiz when they understand that their learning is at the level that they can be successful. So it's not today's the day we're all taking a quiz. It's when are you ready and what are the activities you need to take in order to assess your own mastery. And then you determine that you're ready to take a quiz or that you're ready to take the test. And then there are opportunities for extension. So the interesting thing about that paradigm is learning is never done. If you think about traditional classrooms, so often students get done and they sit and twiddle their thumbs. Oh, you can go read a book, or you can go to the library, you can go on the computer to waste time, per se. Hate to say that, but often it's you're waiting for the rest of the class to catch up. Or you've got the students that are struggling and need more time and are forced into moving on or taking a test or performing a task before they're ready. And then we lose out on maximum learning. When we lose out on maximum learning, we know that we're reducing engagement. If you experience failure, test after test after test, what happens to your level of engagement? And so we know that the pedagogies matter. Student ownership, students being able to have that self-reflection and be able to make some of those choices really does wonderful things for engagement and helps their learning become much more successful. So Terry, I know you had an example from a middle school in Washington, if you want to throw that in.
Yeah, the local middle school, and I'll be quick here. Whatcom Middle School, we were doing service learning programs with young people and engaging them. And when you talk about curriculum, what they were responsible for is actually creating the rubric for their social studies class. So if you can imagine kind of turning over the keys to the students of how you're going to assess, Terry was talking about assessment. So they created the rubrics. So as they did their service learning projects, they were always reflecting on their progress academically, socially, civically, career-oriented. But they owned the rubrics, and so they were much more aligned with the course outcome by taking the outcome and saying, how can we prove that we know this biological fact, or we know how the ecosystem works, or how the watershed operates in our county. So everything was relevant to them because they had created the rubric. And so exams were something they looked forward to, go figure, as opposed to something they dreaded, because it was their exam. They knew what the rubric was. They also knew that they were doing activities through their student engagement and service learning to get them to be proficient in the knowledge and skills in those particular areas. So don't be afraid to engage students in rubric development. It's amazing what they'll come up with in terms of ways of measuring and setting the bar higher sometimes than we even anticipate it'll be for them. So Terry, the last one you talked about in terms of the research was a meaningful learning with authentic choice. One school I went to was a preschool in Cherry Creek, Colorado, in a Denver suburb. And what they do is they do what's called unified yoga, creative storytelling, and physical activity. So each day as the students come in, one student is responsible for going through the day's activities of saying, here's what we're going to be doing over the next periods, et cetera, et cetera. Then as they tell stories, and when I was in observing them, they were telling stories about bears. Then what they do is they pull out their yoga mats and they actually do physical exercise using yoga processes to play out the story. So they talk about the bear going through the woods, walking through the snow, eating berries, picking berries, climbing trees. And so what they've done is they've integrated inclusion, they've integrated student engagement, and they've integrated physical exercise along with their storytelling. So instead of a story being boring, a story comes to life by the actual activities that the young people do. And we were there in March, and they were doing a story about bears, and some of the students were remembering some things from Thanksgiving time and saying, oh wait, can't the bears, instead of eating berries, can't they eat a berry pie? And so they were doing some activities around picking berries, cooking pie crust, and doing exercises around that. So it gives teachers and all of us a way of thinking about, let's take something that could be mundane and let's make it exciting by engaging the young people to be part of that activity.
Well, let's look at that slide that kind of bullets those pieces as we move toward conclusion here, just because of the clock. I think involving the students in all these aspects is kind of exciting, don't you, Sandy?
I do, Marty, and I'm sitting here thinking that, this is a good example of how the research and what we see as best practice is somewhat counterintuitive to the way traditionally we thought. I'm accountable for outcomes. I better take more control of the schedule. I better take more control as a teacher of the content. I'm going to take control of where you sit and how you do it. And yet we need to go against that intuition that we've all had in order to get the result that we really need and want.
What I love is both Terry and Terry are going to be providing us with some videos that show us, and these stories have been great, and we appreciate those. But I think when we see the videos after the program's over, you can go and click on those and have a look. You'll be able to see that this is really happening out there. It's not just stories, it's true. So I think we have to move forward, unfortunately, to this particular one. I think the school climate slide is now up there for y'all to see and to comment on.
Well, I think, we've talked about school climate, the quality and character of a school, and I think the important thing to look at is these 4 segments of this: safety, physical environment, teaching and learning, and trusting relationships. And unlike a lot of things in education where we look at a scope and sequence, this is really about a simultaneous focus. And so you don't say, today we're going to build relationships and tomorrow we're going to do some teaching and learning and we're going to create a better environment and we're going to ensure safety for everybody, physical, emotional, etc. That this is really about weaving these four things together. So it's not a scope and sequence of doing one, then doing another, then doing another. It's really about every day, every class, every period, every student in every classroom having a guaranteed trusting relationship, the insurance of safety, the incorporation of a physical environment, and effective and engaging teaching and learning. And this is where the co-ownership really comes in. It's not just the adult's responsibility to create these conditions for student success, but the student should have a critical role in doing that as well. And Sandy, back to your point you were just making about teachers not having to be responsible for doing everything in the classroom. That this student engagement isn't about teachers taking a back seat. It's about getting them to be learners as well as teachers. And so to me, what's exciting is when I go into classrooms, I come out of there saying I should have taken a pre-test and a post-test because I learned this much just in these 4 or 5 hours. And I think sometimes when teachers think about student engagement, they think, oh, I can sit back and let the students do it. And in fact, the matter is that they're learning. If they're doing this well, they're learning as much as the students are. And I think what's really critical is for teachers to be able to express that to their students, saying, today I learned this from you. And the students are like, wow, really, you learned something from me. And then you start to have these trusting relationships. So school climate is critical, but it's not something you dabble with or think about or have a scope and sequence about. It's something that you always build and you continue to build and have a tighter, better woven student engagement school climate so that it's the climate of the whole school, not just a 1 or 2 classrooms. Also, the critical point here that I think that we've made is that you can start with some champions. I think, Sandy, you'd probably say, so what can principals do? And oftentimes you say you start small and then you go to scale. But sometimes we rely on 1 or 2 champions to do this. And it's good for a start, but it's not good for a finish. And I think what principals need to do is to find those fast horses, let them run, support them, but then learn from them and share it throughout the school and not just say, oh, in this classroom or that classroom, you'll be engaged. But we're going to make sure this is inclusive throughout the entire school and making sure the climate adopts this, not just a classroom climate, but a school climate that's inclusive, engaging, equitable, and fair for all students to be their best selves and to develop their academic, civic, and social emotional skills.
Well, I think that fabric is such a good metaphor for that, and you can keep adding threads. There's no law against that, is there? And I think we're moving toward a conclusion here, and I think Terry Deary, you're going to kind of sum things up for us here before we have to part.
Okay, so as we think about that fabric that we're trying to build, there are some key threads that we need to make sure that we integrate. We know that we need to have a thread that is based on everyone having a common definition of student engagement. Within a system, everyone needs to have a common understanding of what it is that we're looking for and what we find to be acceptable. So that's, I think, the starting point. So you have that kernel that leads to the rest of the development. We need a thread of school-wide and classroom strategies so that student engagement just isn't happening in the classroom, it's happening across the school. So across the school, we're looking at how we integrate effective, equitable practices that include all students in opportunities for leadership. So how can each student be a leader in the school? How can each student have opportunities in the classroom as well as in the hallways and extracurricular activities, and thinking about that whole system? We need to make sure that we are aligning with education initiatives so that we're threading these things together. We don't want student engagement to be something separate from how we're talking about curriculum or separate from how we're talking about policies around school safety or around discipline, so that all of the issues that schools are dealing with have that thread of student engagement and how we're making sure that we're bringing students effectively into that picture. We need to make sure that we are bringing in community, families, parents, students, all of the stakeholders into key decision making so that we have shared leadership. So we have, as Terry was talking about earlier, intergenerational leadership opportunities, that it's students and adults working together to create that supportive environment, that have policies that are not disruptive to the sense of student engagement, but that they help lead to it, and that we are creating that school climate, which is the context. So it's looking at the quality of the school climate, but so that we're creating that supportive, nurturing context for every student in the school.
Okay, and as we kind of round this up, because that's a pretty overwhelming list. This is just getting everybody started. Just know that. You're just getting started on this adventure. And there are a lot of resources. I'd like to put that up on the screen, but of course there will be these and many more on the website here. So there's some really good starting points. I think everybody should look at the silent epidemic to certainly get this the rationale for the student engagement piece from several years back, and ASCDs. They've done some good work, but there's lots of things to get started with. But we do promise to have on our website a lot of these other resources, plus some of these videos, Terry and Terry. So I think I appreciate your putting those together for us. It's time to kind of wrap things up, and we wonder if you had any final comments. Well, Sandy, let's start with you.
Marty, they were right when we began this presentation. Did you notice how many of the 15 effective strategies were listed and highlighted at different places as key, both as requiring engagement and as strategies for increasing student engagement?
Yes.
And so I was certainly taken by that. And the other thing that I'm thinking is this is in fact the umbrella of how to go about this. That's what we want. Students that are engaged, they learn, they stay, they're excited, they want to be there.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add the point that this is pre-K through higher ed. A lot of people think, we talk about career and technology education, but me in my old service learning world, you're starting with preschoolers, and this whole idea of engaging students from the very beginning should become a good habit for all our school systems to kind of go through in involving our students as part of their learning and the whole community. It's just so well introduced today, I think.
It's a whole lot more than just paying attention.
Yeah, I remember we would observe classrooms where they were just writing at their desks. Aren't they? Well, no. You got to have a life. So, boy, thank you for introducing all of us to this incredibly huge and important topic, and the hard work you and Rob and Anderson did on this report is so much appreciated.
Certainly.
And we do hope that more people will download this from the website. There's a link to this report. This is hard copy, but everybody has access to it from the website.
Absolutely.
And we want to direct traffic to that. And any final thoughts, Terry Derry?
Well, I think, my final thought is, as I always tell schools, start from where you are. Start small and always looking for continuous improvement. And I think that's key. You're going to weave the fabric with all of the threads at once. You need to add those threads as you are able, always with the eye toward how we do this systemically, how we do this supportive environment, but to be looking for that continuous improvement. And I think that the key to that is self-reflection.
Yes.
Encouraging your staff to self-reflect, encouraging parents to self-reflect, the leadership across the school, that everyone is always looking for how can we take that next step and add that next thread.
Yes, that's so true. And Terry Pickerel, you have the last word.
Yeah, first, a big thank you, Marty, to you and Sandy and the Center for allowing us to advocate for student engagement. And Sandy, we appreciate that you see this woven into and nested into the 15 strategies. One of the things that we know schools do when they take on an innovation or a new initiative is they do professional development. And one of the things I would encourage schools to think about is not just doing a standalone, we're going to do professional development around student engagement, but to blend student engagement into all the professional development you're doing, if it's about math or social science or working with the community or fiscal literacy, is to think about ways you can blend student engagement to make it relevant into all of those topics. So it's not a standalone for some people to do, but it's critical within the curricular and teaching and learning strategies. So we don't let it reside at the margins, but it becomes part of the mainstream and actually changes the mainstream as we do that. So in professional development, it's good to start with kind of a student engagement 101, but that's not sufficient. It's kind of like participation, voice, and engagement. We really want to move it into the core of professional development and make sure that it exists outside of just its own domain.
Wow.
Great point.
Great points and great last words from both of you.
Yes.
And as I said, our appreciation so much for both of you, for Wisconsin and Washington State. We appreciate your coming to Clemson today to join us this morning on such an important initiative.
Terry, what a contribution. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
And now, Sandy, it's time to close it down. A special long one today, but the topic was extraordinary,
Yes,
and
it was,
we
Marty.
needed to give it every minute because it needed every minute.
Yes.
And it's a start for, we hope, a lot of people to get
We hope
into
everyone
this.
will access these resources that'll be on our website now and take advantage.
Okay. Well, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Marty.
And thanks to all our viewers for coming with us today to learn more about student engagement and how you can get started on that continuum to be having your school, your teachers, your students, your community, everybody truly engaged in not just dropout prevention, but total school improvement. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Solutions to the Dropout Crisis, addressing the dropout crisis one strategy at a time.